Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. We find ourselves surrounded by the world of Drew Coblitz. Drew, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So I can see where your passions and your journey as a collector lead, but explain to me how it started. How did you discover your passion for watches?
So for me, my watch passion actually started by following my mother into jewelry stores when I was about this tall, around the Philadelphia area, actually Govberg being one of the first that I probably was ever in. And while she was looking around, I inevitably looked for anything that could, remotely entertain me, because this was before, Game Boy and, anything that I guess kids are playing with, or at least used to. And I'd always end up focusing on the watches because I thought it was just cool and, and interesting. And the guys that were in there would always, take out whatever I wanted to see, which was fascinating to me. And fast forward some years, I finally was able to purchase a couple interesting watches, and then fast forward some more years, and we're in this warehouse right now.
We're in this warehouse surrounded by automobiles, some of which are actually his, as well as a few selections from your collection. Before we jump to those,
Sure.
Let me ask, was there a first watch, and do you still have it?
Okay, yes, there was a first watch. My first watch was a Tag Heuer Formula One, which you could never guess given this. And I don't still have it where I know where it is, but I do know it exists in my parents' house somewhere, because I did see it a couple years ago. And that was it had a blue case. It must have been 36 millimeters or something rather small, rubber band. And given that I still remember that to this day, it obviously had an impact.
So clearly you have a passion for automobiles and for watches, and sometimes these two things sort of intertwine. Why don't we talk a little bit about your collection right now? And I think there's one in particular that stood out the other day. You were talking about your Richard Mille RM6702. Tell me a little bit about that and how it grabs you in both ways, watches and wheels.
So I really appreciate new technology and new takes on old school, things that have been around for a long time. And it's been very interesting to see the watch world, which it was always mechanically interesting and complex, and then more complications would be would get added on, and companies like Patek Philippe and Vacheron Constantin have been doing this for forever. But something I thought was a very interesting modern innovation is making these things work but lighter. And this is also something that in cars has been intrinsic to enjoyment, performance, kind of you name it. I believe it was Chapman who said, add lightness. And Richard Mille historically has done some incredibly interesting things complication-wise, and there are merits to what they've done. I recognize that there's some marketing and hype base there, but something that they did with the 6702 was make it at least at that time, the lightest automatic watch, period. And that was just really interesting to me. I really appreciate the NTPT technology. I'm generally surrounded by carbon fiber and all sorts of other high-tech materials, lightweight, strong, high-tech materials, and the layering that NTPT is comprised of just was really cool to me. And I've been a McLaren person for quite some time as well. So when the 6702 came out, it was really the first Richard Mille that I was like, this is absolutely amazing. And I ended up with one of my friends working for the company in New York, and he also came from a racing background. He was an engineer with one of the teams, and awesome guy. And he said, you've got to come in and check some of this stuff out. So I go in. I actually tried on one of their NTPT tourbillons, and I was already blown away at how it felt, because historically we kind of have this, if the watch is heavier, it's made better, or it's worth more, kind of whatever. And I put this thing on, and it was the coolest thing of having this unbelievably light, piece of machinery on a wrist, and it just feels like this. You could wear it playing tennis. You can wear it in anything, and you just wouldn't think about it. So, I was like, okay, so what's the deal with the 6702? I understand that they're extremely hard to get, but what's the deal? And he his name is Donald, and he said, you know what, I know you do a lot of stuff around cars. I know I know you have a McLaren or two, or you've done events with them. Maybe there's something that we can do. And I had told him then that I actually had just signed up to run this car here, do a top speed run, which I was in Grand Am, but we only ever hit maybe 170, 75, 80 tops given the gearing in it. And this was the first opportunity for me to hit, over 200 miles an hour, which to some people doesn't sound like that much, but it's a pretty big deal for someone that's in the car world to have the chance to do it. And I said, this would be kind of a fun thing to have, that watch and do that event in this car. It just would kind of work out. So he goes and he talks to one of his managers, and a few days later he's like, hey, if you really want to do it, here's the deal. It's absolutely been overall one of my favorite watches and favorite experiences, because then I went with that watch. I went to the event. I hit 205 miles an hour. It's top speed wearing it, and that to me just added such a special story to that watch. And then even the brand that just. Yeah, it's a different thing for me.
You did describe Richard Mille ownership as sort of an experience and an ongoing experience. It's cool that you associate the watch with going 200. I associate this watch with going 500, but it was in an airplane. I like yours better. Tell me about the community around the RM brand, because I got to admit, I don't get the RM thing, and
Yeah.
I believe a lot of our viewers probably feel the same way, saying, it's a basic watch, it costs so much, what are you getting for your money? Tell me a little bit more about the human side, because this is what I didn't get.
They have all sorts of people who are willing to pay them for a variety of their pieces. So they aren't for a shortage of customers. But what's very interesting is they actually will listen to your story. And it's not just about what's in a bank account or who you know or any of that. They want to sell watches to people who they know will end up getting together well. And by that I mean they'll after you purchase a watch from them, they'll invite you to events that are actually some of the most special private events I have ever been to. Show up at this place, this time, and a little private concert. It's just the private concert is by Wynton Marsalis, and introducing you to friends of theirs, friends of the brand, inviting you to come in and check out their facilities. Meet the drivers who the watches are built off of. And they do it because they know the conversation that you'll have is absolutely passion driven. And you're there with, a couple other of your friends, and, this is stuff that you remember for literally the rest of your life. So when I got to meet Felipe Massa and some of the other F1 drivers and Formula E drivers, I mean, we talk cars, we talk shop. It's really something that I hold as extremely special to me, and I thank them consistently for offering this stuff to me over and over. It's really amazing.
And I know you are a race car driver yourself. You've driven Porsche Cup, you've driven under the Speedway sanctioned Grand Am supporting races, and of course you enjoy a good track day. So let me ask, how does your love for cars shape your love for watches? Because I can see 1, 2, possibly 3 watches on that table that have automotive connections. In addition to being able to kind of meet your racing heroes with RM, tell me a little bit about the Porsche Club of America special series you've got on the table, the gray side Porsche of America.
So I very rarely get caught up in car-specific limited edition watches, because you buy and sell cars and they go away, and then you have this watch that matches no car and it kind of looks whatever. But the Porsche Club is something that I've been a member of for, it's got to be going between 10 and 15 years at this point, and they were my first contact with, really even with track driving, and then competitive driving, and then moving forward into Grand Am. So I have a really soft spot in my heart for the organization, and they did this collaboration with Omega, which I love the brand, and I always have, and I had a classic Speedmaster for quite some time. But I also have this thing for materials that aren't able to be scratched, because when you're in a car or doing anything that revolves around a lot of metal and heat and everything else. I like things to be able to take abuse and still, you know, look pretty fresh. So when they came out with this, with the ceramic case, little accents that remind you of, you know, of the cars. The yellow is supposed to be the carbon ceramic brake caliper color. I was kind of enamored, and then they made it limited to, I think, 99 watches, which I just thought that whole mix of, there was a little exclusivity, it was resistant to anything that you would do in a car, and it just kind of became the, okay, I have to have it kind of thing.
I got to agree with you. I mean, between all of the themes going on, the complementary yellow colors, the perforated strap, since it is based on the gray side, it's almost like the best version of Omega's best ceramic watch.
Yeah, and they did it for, you know, the PCA, which was the funniest thing to me, because I think it would have been, you know, something that collectors would have been well served with in a host of other associations, but I won't complain at all.
Now, I feel you with the ceramic cases, because I always say that the first scratch on your watch, it scratches your watch and it scores your soul. And that's particularly true with anything like a Royal Oak, a Nautilus, or an Overseas. So tell me a little bit about what you love about your scratch-proof Royal Oak Perpetual calendar.
So I love Audemars. It's been one of my favorite designs, favorite aesthetic, I mean, just favorite watch pieces, watch companies, and then the Royal Oak, you know, pieces have been, they're just incredibly special. And I've had a few of the normal 41 millimeter Royal Oaks. I've had offshores. I've had most of the Royal Oak offerings, and every single time anything happened to that bezel, it would just hurt. And, you know, I have massive levels of OCD that developed from the Royal Oak. I don't think I noticed things nearly as much until I had that. And it would always be, I would get one, it would be total love, something would happen, and then I'd be like, all right, do I send it in or do I trade in? This kind of went on more than a few times. And then when they came out with the ceramic Perpetual, I was thinking, okay, now I can have the best of every possible world. They use the same finishing techniques altered for the ceramic in order to give it the same finish that the steel models and the gold models have, but in this totally scratch-resistant case. And I have definitely proven it. I have worn it thoroughly. I've definitely rubbed it against things a couple times by accident and just thought that immediate, oh my God, you know, gut dropping kind of feel, and then you look and you're like, nope, we're good to go. This is awesome. And with that particular watch, I'm also a fan of the Perpetual calendars. I think are one of the most functional complications in a watch, and you know, especially over time, it's you know, it's always kind of wonderful to watch all the functions, and especially a moon phase like this one, like this particular one has, and the aventurine dial, moon phase dial is kind of gorgeous. But to surround it by this, you know, a classic movement by such a modern case and case finishing, that just hits me in every possible place that I enjoy.
It is almost like having your cake and eating it too, getting the Royal Oak finish, getting the ceramic case. And I have the same feeling with my Zin, with the tegmented steel, where I'll whack it against a doorknob or a door frame, or God help us, a seatbelt buckle in a car. And I look, I'm like, I got away with murder. But when you've got vintage, both in cars and in watches, you have to coexist with some level of imperfection. So let me ask, how did you get over that OCD to embrace vintage?
So I think for me, something can either be full patina, and I'll love it for having full patina, and then you don't worry about all the little stuff that happens, or it's perfect. There's this like mid-zone that ends up being pretty tough. So it was actually very easy for me to get into vintage, and in particular vintage Rolex, because I mean, a lot of these things have taken more beating than, you know, any other kind of watch. I mean, the watch that I'm wearing now was originally owned by a Turkish diver, and he wore it for everything, absolutely everything. So it's got divots, nicks, scrapes, the bezels, you know, half kind of wearing off. And that just, I like it because it's kind of got his story in it, and then as I'm wearing it, it picks up little divots, nicks, and dings that, you know, that I add to it, and it becomes part of my story. And I particularly enjoy that. Granted, it's been fun to then find some vintage watches that are in extremely good condition, because that hunt is also really a big part of the fun. and also, I guess, a part of its story. But yeah, so that transition kind of ends up working pretty well for me.
Okay, someone else got the first scratch.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the key, guys. Let someone else scratch the watch first.
Yeah.
So, since you do have different standards for different kinds of watches and also different kinds of cars in your collection, you have contemporary, you have vintage, and sort of a different eye and a different part in your heart for those two fields. Do you have two different philosophies for building your watch collection, or is it more a single view that leads to both vintage and modern falling in the same box?
I guess for me, I need to have something of a story with it. That's how I shape kind of what I'm looking for. And for instance, that could even be with a new Rolex release where, everyone wants them, but the difference would end up being that I would only want it if there was if the conversation that I have with with my authorized dealer or with a dealer ends up being out of other passions, other things, and then there's a way to have that watch, then have a story to it, and have it be something that's kind of new or rare. That to me will dictate more on what I'm interested in buying than necessarily just the watch alone.
So it sounds like you do have sort of an emotionally guided acquisition strategy. Are there any watches that are on your roadmap? Like you're already in love, you're already convinced, you've got to add them, it just hasn't happened yet?
Yeah, although it's an interesting one. I actually really enjoy the new Bulgari aluminum line. It's one of those watches, I'm finding that I have this like 90s, it's like 90s alt rock. There's something about 90s alt rock that it doesn't matter how old you are, how old you were when you heard it, or how old you are when you hear it, today. It just hits you in this kind of spot. And I'm enjoying. I really enjoyed when I saw the advertisement for their new aluminum, because it just threw me right back then, and they changed all the little things that wouldn't make it a watch for me, the old one a watch for me today, but the new one absolutely. They made the case a little bit more contemporary to 40 millimeters, but they didn't go overboard to 42, 3, 4, any of the oversized. They gave the watch a proper movement from the quartz movement that they had. And the aluminum case is kind of fits with my alternate materials, kind of thing that I've got going on here. And that watch is, I believe the base time only is like $2,900, and the chronograph is something around $4,200. And I'm actually more excited to see that than I am pretty much anything else that's kind of come out as of late. So that's definitely on my list. In a car nerd point, there is one of the new Rolex offerings that I have already reached out for, and I hopefully should end up with. I hope it's not too difficult. When they redid the Oyster Perpetual in the 41 millimeter, the watch itself was already very cool, classic, wear anywhere kind of thing. But when I saw it, they offered the green dial, and the lacquer green dial, not sunburst. I mean, a racing green is like one of my favorite things. So I saw this and I was like, that's it. That is absolutely the thing that I want from the new releases. So I think that one's pretty cool. As far as some of the more complicated releases or things I'm maybe looking forward to, Richard Mille did just release their new 7201, and it is a very cool watch. I'll want to check that out on the wrist, but I will be very interested when they end up doing that in NTPT, which I'm sure they are working on now. And when that time comes, then maybe I'll figure out what I need to do in order to try to add one onto the list. But yeah, I need to have some tie to it. Just having it for the sake of having it, or having it to post a picture of it, does very little for me.
Well, let's see. Cars, rock, watches, the color green. I like this guy. Let me ask you another question, because clearly community is a huge part of the watch hobby, and growing up in the late 90s as a kid, we had cool cars, we had some good music, and a few breakthrough watches even came out, but there was no way to connect with other collectors. If you were into watches as a teenager, you probably thought you were sort of alone, because it wasn't well developed on the internet. Yeah. Most of the people who were into this were in Asia or Europe, and most of them were old. Today it's a bit of a younger scene, it's better connected online. How do you connect with other collectors, experts in vintage Rolex, people who are in the RM community? Do you do it online, in person, a mix of both?
So it's definitely a mix of both. That is one absolute benefit of social media, though, nowadays. And Instagram even in particular, there are definitely other collectors that I would never have known. It just happens to, you either see a picture or, they see one of yours or something else, and, it's not like a immediate kind of thing, but you can see that there are other people that are into the same, same watches, same experiences, same other things, and at some point it's kind of inevitable that you either, some comment or some, something else, and it just sparks a conversation, and then I can't tell you the amount of times that's kind of happened, and then we'll know multiple, 5, 10, even 15 people in common, and we just wouldn't have otherwise met at an event. Or even with car shows, for instance, you walk by people all the time, and you don't know the cars that they collect, they're interested in, and you don't really talk to them other than if you just kind of happenstance do it. But the social media platforms have really made that such an easy thing that I'd say it's bolstered the watch community massively.